There are nights that linger in the mind, nights so twisted they wrap themselves around your soul and never let go. I should have known this was one of them the moment the passenger stepped out of my car. It was nearly 2 a.m., the witching hour for Uber drivers, when the suburban streets turn into a labyrinth of darkened houses, flickering streetlights, and yawning silence. My last passenger had been a young woman in her 20s, bubbly and chatty. She'd been gushing about some party and fumbling with her glittery purse. After dropping her off at a modest cul-de-sac, I watched her stagger up the driveway before reversing back into the empty street. I thought I was alone, but as I turned the corner, the headlights appeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. Other drivers were out here too, making their way through the winding maze of suburban monotony. But something about those lights felt strange. They stayed too close, just at the edge of my rearview mirror, following every turn I made. It wasn't until I purposefully circled a block twice and still saw them tailing me that the unease settled deep in my gut. This wasn't coincidence. This was intentional. I've been driving for Uber long enough to have my fair share of strange stories. Once, I picked up a guy who refused to tell me where he was going. He just kept saying, "Drive, man. Just drive." Another time, a couple got into a screaming match in my back seat, and I had to pull over to kick them both out. But this was different. This was calculated. I could feel it. The car behind me was a black sedan, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see a thing. It wasn't aggressive, no revving engine, no attempts to overtake me, but it didn't back off either. I switched on my blinker and turned onto another street. The sedan followed. I took another turn. It followed again. By the fourth turn, my palms were slick on the steering wheel, and my heartbeat was a dull thud in my ears. I glanced at the dash-mounted phone, where the Uber app still glowed softly. No new ride requests. The map showed me weaving through the suburban sprawl like a rat trapped in a maze. I reached for the phone, debating whether to call the police, but a thought stopped me. What would I even say? "Hi, yes, there's a car following me, but they haven't done anything illegal." They'd probably tell me to go home and lock my doors, but I couldn't go home. Whoever was in that car would know where I lived. The thought made my skin crawl. Instead, I decided to shake them off. Suburbs like these were a warren of cul-de-sacs and dead ends, perfect for losing a tail. I drove into a neighborhood I knew well, one I'd mapped in my mind over countless rides. Left, right, left again. The sedan stayed with me. Then I spotted the turn, a narrow alley that snaked behind a row of houses. It was barely wide enough for two cars to squeeze through, but it was a shortcut that spilled out onto a busier road. I swerved into it without signaling, tires crunching over loose gravel. The sedan hesitated at the mouth of the alley. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. Then their headlights cut in. The busier road offered little comfort. The sedan kept its distance now, but it was still there, shadowing me like a predator toying with its prey. My chest tightened with each passing minute. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, those headlights stared back at me, unwavering. I couldn't take it anymore. At the next red light, I slammed my car into park, threw open the door, and stepped out into the cool night air. The sedan pulled up behind me and stopped. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The street was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of cicadas and the faint buzz of a dying street lamp. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, with a wiry frame and a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. His eyes were dark, unblinking, and his mouth was set in a thin, humorless line. He didn't look angry or threatening, just, determined. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The man raised a hand, palm out, as if to show he meant no harm. "You've got something that belongs to me," he said. His voice was calm, measured, like we were discussing a parking ticket. I frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about." "My phone," he said. "One of your passengers left it in your car. I've been following you to get it back." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. I hadn't found a phone in the car, and I told him as much. "You must have missed it," he insisted. "Check again." Something about his tone set my teeth on edge. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Still, I didn't want to escalate things. I walked back to my car, opened the back door, and scanned the seat. Nothing. I even checked the floor and under the seats, but there was no phone. When I turned back to tell him, he was already walking toward me. "Look," I said, holding up my hands. "There's nothing here. Maybe your passenger dropped it somewhere else." The man didn't stop. He reached the car and tried to push past me, his eyes locked on the interior. "Move," he growled. I stepped in front of him, heart pounding. "Hey, you can't just..." Before I could finish, he shoved me aside and ducked into the car. Panic flared in my chest. I grabbed his arm, but he yanked free, his strength surprising for his wiry frame. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. He didn't answer. He was rummaging through the back seat, muttering under his breath. That's when I noticed something glinting in his hand, a knife. Time slowed to a crawl. The blade wasn't large, just a folding knife, the kind you could buy at any hardware store, but the sight of it made my blood run cold. My first instinct was to run, but this was my car, my livelihood. I couldn't just abandon it. "Get out of my car," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound firm. The man ignored me, still muttering as he searched. Then, without warning, he turned towards me, the knife pointed in my direction. "Stay back," he said, his voice low and dangerous. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about a phone. It couldn't be. "You need to leave," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Right now." The man's eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment I thought he might listen, but then he lunged. I stumbled back, barely avoiding the blade. Adrenaline surged through me as I scrambled to the other side of the car, putting the hood between us. The man followed, his movements quick and precise, like he'd done this before. My mind raced, searching for a way out. "Help!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty street. "Somebody help me!" The man didn't even flinch. He just kept coming, his expression eerily calm, as if this were all part of some twisted game. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to dial 911, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the street, bathed in the sickly glow of a street lamp. A woman. She was watching us, her face obscured by shadows. "Help me!" I called out to her, desperation lacing my voice. The woman didn't move. The man glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear. He backed away slowly, knife still in hand, his gaze darting between me and the silent figure. Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there trembling as the woman stepped into the light. She was pale, almost ghostly, with wide, unblinking eyes. She said nothing, just stared at me for a long, unsettling moment, before turning and walking away. I wanted to call out to her, to thank her, but the words caught in my throat. Something about her presence unsettled me, as if she didn't quite belong in that moment, in that place. When I finally climbed back into my car, I found a phone lying on the passenger seat. It wasn't mine. The screen lit up with a single notification. "You can't escape. Not yet."